Hey everyone! Today on the plastic canvas we're painting the tough guy from Etherfields by Awaken Realms. Hey everyone, Matt here from the Plastic Canvas and welcome to the 5th episode in this Etherfields series, and today we are painting the tough guy. He's one of the characters that you can play as in this adventure game from Awaken Realms. So before I start painting a mini, I always go through a similar process just to try and get a clear image in my head of how I want it to end up looking and what the steps are that I'm going to go through to paint it. So I always just start by grabbing the mini and the player card for it, or the artwork depending on what there is, just to try and work out what the different colours of the mini are and what the different materials are. So which parts are metal, which parts are leather, and so on. And that will also help me to work out what order I'm going to paint all of the different parts in. What I found when looking over the Tough Guy mini though is that there are a couple of different parts here and there that I wasn't really sure exactly what they were supposed to be, both in terms of colour and material. One example, which you can't see at the moment but you will see a little bit later as it just pans around, is that on his left hip there looks to be some sort of material just wrapping around his hip onto his back. But it's got an interesting looking texture to it. It kind of zigzags up and down, almost in like a leafy sort of pattern. And even though I now have finished the mini and I have painted it, I still don't actually know what it's supposed to be. I ended up choosing to paint it purple to look like purple sort of material, just because at the point when I got to it, oh, you can see it there, it's just on his left hip. That's just that part that I'm talking about there. I ended up painting it purple because that was a colour that seemed to fit in with the overall look of the mini, and then I just did some simple highlighting and shading. But even though I finished painting it, like I said, I still don't actually know what it's meant to be. Anyway, there are a couple of little parts like that. I've had this happen in the past, and I talked about it at length when I painted the Four Dweller from Tainted Grail, another Awaken Realms game, because I painted that game before we'd obviously played it, and so I didn't know where to find the artwork for the Four Dweller, so I didn't know what a lot of the different materials were supposed to be, what was supposed to be stone and metal and different things like that. What I found when painting a mini like the Tough Guy, where you've got those couple of bits that you're really not sure of, whether they're supposed to be leather or some other sort of material or what colour they should be, the best way to approach it is to just start painting. And I know that seems a little bit counterintuitive because you're not sure how to paint it, but you should start. What I mean is just work out the parts that you are confident with, the parts that you do know what colour they're going to be or what material they're going to be, and just get started with them. And that's an important thing to do for a couple of reasons. One is that once you get going, you just start to build a bit of confidence because you've made a start. All right, so just getting started just gets you moving and just helps build that confidence a little bit. What I've also found is that once you paint some parts, it can often help inform what the part next to it may be. And the more detailed a mini is, the more useful I find this, because you've got so many different parts to try and work out. And this sort of reminds me of when I was painting the soldiers that you can play as in Zombicide Invader, because they have basically head to toe armor that's this light grey, almost white sort of color, but it's made up of lots of different armor panels rather than just sort of one kind of big piece. And what I found tricky in some cases was to work out what was armor paneling and what parts were like ammo pouches and things like that, because they were similar sorts of ambiguous shapes. So what I did there was I painted all of the parts of the armor that I was confident was armor. Then as I got to those smaller parts that I wasn't quite sure of, I was able to use what I had painted to help tell me what would make sense for the parts that I wasn't sure of. So with these little parts that were sticking up that I wasn't sure if they were ammo pouches or not, once I'd sort of gotten to that point by painting the armor, well, if that part was armor, it would just continue through flat. There would be no reason for it to sort of jut out in that ammo pouch looking kind of way. And so I just decided, well, those are just ammo pouches. So by painting the bits that I was confident of, it then helped inform the parts that I wasn't sure of. And you find the same sorts of things with color as well. You may not know what color to paint a certain part. So if you just get started with the parts that you are sure of or that you are confident of, then that will help tell you where you may need to break a particular color up, or you may need to add a contrasting bit of color just to add a little bit more variety. And so paint the parts that you are sure of, and then when you then get to that part that you're not sure if it's supposed to be red or brown or whatever, the other parts will help tell you what color that should be, because if you have been painting lots of other parts to be, say, brown leather, you may need to break that brown up so that you can help bring the details out a little bit and add a little bit more interest. So then that part that you wasn't sure of, well, maybe that's the part that you do that with. So maybe you paint that to be red or purple or something to contrast that brown. Anyway, like, there's sort of some vague examples I know, and they, you know, it's not sort of too specific, but the point that I'm making there is that if you do have those parts that you're not sure of, you don't know what color or material they should be, just work out the parts that you do know and just get started with them. It'll build your confidence because you have gotten a start, and then those parts can help inform what you're not sure of, what color they should be, what material they should be, because it may help you to know what would make sense. But then also, like I said, it'll show you where you may need to break certain colors up so that you can add in those contrasting colors just to help bring out some detail and add a little bit of variety as well. So up until this point so far, it's just been base coating. So I just started with a zenithal prime just so I could see where the brightest highlight should be, and now I'm just blocking in all of the different base coat colors. What I'm doing here though is that as I'm painting these, I don't know what these are actually supposed to be. They're just these kind of dangly sorts of parts. I knew that I wanted to paint the middle parts red to tie in with the red on the centurion sort of part of his helmet and the cape on his back. But because there's an edging to each of those dangly parts, and I knew I was going to be painting them a bronze sort of color, it was going to be really, really difficult to do the highlighting and shading on these red parts if I'd already painted the trims, because I was going to have to be very, very careful to not get any of the red over the trim. So at the moment, I'm just doing all of the highlighting and shading on these red middle parts so that then when I come back and do the trim later on, I won't have to go back and do any touching up. So I base coated these parts in Carnage Red, which is just one of my mid-tone reds, and then I just started to mix in a little bit of Magma Red, one of my brighter reds, and then I just put that down in the top sort of half of each of the dangly parts, and then just feathered out the edge towards the bottom sort of direction, just so that it gradually thinned it out and helped blend it back into the Carnage Red. Then I added in some more Magma Red, and then started at the top again of each of those little parts, but just didn't paint it down quite as far, feathered it out again, and then just kept repeating that process until I was on the straight Magma Red, and then I was only painting just the very, very top part of each of those red sections, just to get the top brighter than the bottom. And then I just went back with, I think it was the Bloodstain Red, just one of my darkest reds, thinned it down, just put a little bit at the bottom of each of the parts, and then blended it back up just to increase that contrast so that that blend from the highlight through to the shadow is easier to see. And then I just went back and then with the bronze color painted each of the trims, just took my time, did that nice and carefully, and then I didn't need to do any touching up. Now here you can see I'm starting to put the black wash down on all of the metal parts, just starting off with the chain there. Now usually washes are put down on textured surfaces to flow into all of the recesses so that it will bring out all of the detail and texture and make it more obvious. In this case though, yeah sure, it will do that and it works well on like the chain and different parts like that. but the main reason that I'm putting the black wash down here is just to take the shine out of the metallic paint because they are quite shiny. And when I'm painting a mini, I always try and think about the character and their story and the sorts of things that they're doing, so that as I paint them, I can try and sort of work that into their overall look. And the tough guy here being an adventurer, once upon a time, all of these metal parts would have been brand new and shiny and reflective, but over time, in battles and adventuring, they're going to get dirty and tarnished and worn, and all of that shine's going to be knocked off them. And so that's why I put the black wash over the top, just to dull them down, knock off the shine, because then later on I'll come back and put some of the shine back on, and it just helps the overall weathered and aged look, and helps just to tell the story of this guy a little bit more. Same sort of thing with on his left knee there, you can see like there's a bit of a, I just interpreted that as like a bit of a patch or something on his pants. I painted it the bone color to look like material, but then the sepia wash over the top just helps it to look a little bit aged and a bit dirty, and just that overall look that this guy is an adventurer. He doesn't spend his time much in town, he's out in the wild, getting dirty, in battles, those sorts of things, and just all of these little decisions just help work towards that overall look. Now this technique that I'm doing here has appeared in a few of my recent videos just because I really like the look of it, but I'm just doing a tarnished leather look on this leg covering part on his right leg there. So I just grabbed my bone color first and just did lots of lines and dots to kind of look like scratches and scuff marks and things like that. Concentrated it mostly on the edges that are most protruding, and then I've just got my red, yellow and brown wash, and then with no real like plan to it, just put them over the part that I'm trying to get this tarnished leather look to, and just mixed them together, blended them together, and then once they dried, I've then come back and with the bone color again, I'm just redoing those lines and dots. And the idea here is that the washes will get some natural variations to the color, but will let the bone color come through to varying degrees. And so as I came back the second time with the bone color to do the scratches, I didn't cover as much area as what I did the first time, so that then you have different degrees of the bone color coming through, and so it makes some of those scratches and scuff marks look more aged than other parts. And so now I'm just doing the second coat of the wash, and then I will come back just in a second and do a third go, or a third pass, here we are, with the bone color. This is just the final scuff marks. So here I'm just being, you can see I'm being very careful. I'm only just doing very little, just dots and dashes just here and there. I'm trying to leave as much of the other layers of the bone color to show through as possible. So what I'm painting here are just the most recent scuff marks. It just makes it look a bit old, a bit worn. And like I was sort of talking about before with the black wash going over the metal just to make it look aged, again, it just adds to that overall look. But I really like that effect. It's very simple. I've done it a few times, but yeah, I think it just adds nicely to that overall impression that this guy is an adventurer. He's out in the wild. Nothing that he's wearing is brand new, and it's all taken damage over time. But that character story is really something that I try and keep in the back of my mind, because it really helps to inform how I'm going to paint all of the different parts so that everything ties together to really be cohesive. And it can be something really simple. Like, let's say you're just painting zombicide characters. You know, one character may have a rifle, and so using a ranged weapon, they're probably not going to cop too much blood, but another character may have a chainsaw or swords or something like that, and so you're just going to be adding more blood to the characters with the swords and the chainsaws than what you are with the ranged weapons. And so the amount of blood on the different characters really helps to tell their story and show their experiences while fighting zombies. And so I do think it's an important thing to keep in the back of your mind, because it really does help to direct the way that you paint everything, just so that it all ties together nicely. So here I'm just starting some very simple highlighting for this chest leather piece that the tough guy is wearing, just because I wanted to brighten the upper part of the mini a little bit more, just to draw the attention up to towards more the face. So I originally base coated this with the earth brown and then just used Agrax Earthshade just as a wash over the top, just to flow into the recesses. Now I've just gone back to the earth brown and I'm just mixing in some leather brown as well, just to lighten it off a little bit. And I'm just focusing it on, as you can see, just the strap coming over his shoulder and then just that top left hand corner of it. So that's where I'm keeping it the brightest, and then I'm just feathering the edge away from that corner just so that it gradually thins it out, blends back into the earth brown Agrax Earthshade base coat color for the rest of it. And then every layer of it that I did, I just added a little bit more of the leather brown just to gradually lighten it up. And now we're just at straight leather brown, and you can see I just put a little bit of it right at the very top of the strap and just feather that down towards the bottom end of the strap so that the top of the strap is the brightest part. And then just a little bit of the leather brown just on that corner there, and now I'm feathering it away from that corner so that the strap in that corner is the brightest part, which will hopefully just draw the gaze up to the top a little bit. Now I'm just picking out just this little part of the chest piece. I didn't know what this part was supposed to be, if it was something to pick out or not, but I just thought I'd paint that leather brown. I do put an Agrax wash over the top just so that there is a part of it that stands out a little bit more. And then here there just looked to be a chain of some sort just there. Again, I don't know if that's actually what it's supposed to be. The artwork is quite dark in this area, so I kind of just made this up a little bit. Same with this red part here. Earlier on, I was talking about how painting some parts can help inform what color another part should be, and that's what happened with that little red part strap sort of thing that I painted there. I just thought it needed something other than brown in there just to help bring that detail out a little bit more. So I chose red because that's the color that I painted his cape and those dangly parts at the front. So I just painted that little part red. That just helped to break that brown up a little bit and just introduce another color. So now I'm just into doing the highlighting and shading for his cape. It's just very simple layering techniques here. So I've gone to Bloodstain Red, which is my darkest red, and you can see I did a test on my nail there just to show you how thin it is. So I mixed lots and lots of water in, so it's very thin, and the idea here is that every layer of paint that goes down only makes a slight change to the previous layer. So the thinner the paint is, obviously the more layers it takes to build it up, but the more control you have over how quickly it gets darker or lighter. So for the first layer of the shading, I just painted all of the areas that I want to be in shadow, and then I just cleaned the bristles off and then just feathered out the edge so that it blends back into the Carnage Red, which was the base coat. And then I just come back after it's dried for a second layer, but I don't cover as much area as what I did for the first layer, but again, feather the edge out, and that will just help to gradually build a bit of a blend. And then I did 3 or 4 layers for the shadows. The final layer was just a very small bit, just right in where I want the shadow to be its darkest. And then because I then feathered the edge out each time, that just helps create a nice blend from the deepest part of the shadow out to the Carnage Red, which is the base coat color. Now I've taken the Carnage Red, mixing in the Magma Red, and now I'm doing the highlight. So the first stage of the highlight just covered all of the areas that I thought would get any amount of light, and now into the second layer I've mixed in more Magma Red so it's brighter, and I'm now starting to reduce the amount of area that I'm painting. So where I think more light would be hitting, that's where the paint is going for this layer. And again, then clean the bristles off and just feather out the edge towards the direction of the shadow so that it starts to get a blend from the highlight through to the base coat Carnage Red color through to then the shadow color. And every layer of the highlights just get more and more Magma Red. You can see now I'm in straight Magma Red, and this is just going where I want the highlights to be their brightest. So again, just reducing the amount of area that I'm covering, clean off the bristles, feather out the edge in the direction towards the shadow, and that just helps to get those nice smooth blends. And then just as a final, like just boost to the contrast just to try and really help bring out where the brightest highlights are. I do end up adding a little bit of orange. That just lightens it off that little bit more. I kept that to really, really small areas though, just where I wanted the highlights to be their absolute brightest. And for this, I referred back to the photos that I took after I did a Zenithal Prime, just to make sure that I was putting those in the correct spot. So here you can see I'm now mixing that orange in. It just helps to just brighten it that little bit more. Originally, like back when I first started painting, if I was highlighting with red, I only had a red, I didn't, have a wide variety of colors, I would just mix some white into the red for where I wanted the highlights to be. The problem there, though, is that it starts to turn it pink, and red doesn't turn pink as light hits it. It turns more towards the orange and yellow sorts of colors. And so this just helps create it so it lightens it off so that you can have the brightest highlights, but it still keeps it looking red. And yeah, so orange just sort of works well as that color to mix in. And so here is that final highlight that I do. I've got a bit more orange mixed in now, and you can see it's just that little bit right at the top of that fold, and then just feather it out. And then I go through the same color process here for this, the feathery sorts of parts, whatever they are, just for this Centurion hat. So what I want to have here is where all of these feather parts meet the helmet. That's where it's its darkest. And then the very, very tips are noticeably brighter. So I'm working quite a bit of orange into these tips, and I'm just working very, very carefully to make sure that I have a dark line in between each of these highlights, just so that you can see that there is texture to it, but the top is quite a bit brighter than what the bottom is. Now, just a quick note here, because I'd like some feedback on this part of the video. You may have noticed that a couple of minutes ago, the way the colors look shifted a little bit, because I'm trying a different setting on the camera just to make the colors a little bit more vibrant, because I just wasn't sure if it was looking just a little bit too desaturated. Anyway, I noted it with some text earlier on screen when it happened. At about the 24-minute mark is when I changed the settings back to how they originally are. So if you could just keep a bit of an eye on that and just see whether you prefer the way the colors look at the moment or the way they do when they shift back. Like I said, at about the 24-minute mark, please leave in the comments below whether you prefer this look at the moment or when it changes back. That would be really appreciated, and then I can sort of make sure I'm using the right settings for videos going forward. So earlier in the video, I was talking about how I always try and consider a character's story, so what sorts of things they'd be doing, what sorts of adventures they'd be going on, to help direct the way that I paint a mini. And that's what I'm starting to do here. So to me, the tough guy would be an adventurer that's not really interested in the finer things in life. As long as his weapons and armor works, it doesn't matter whether they're brand new and shiny or not. So, you know, maintenance and things like that is probably not something that the tough guy does a lot. So here with these metallic parts here with the chain and the head of the hammer sort of pick kind of thing, I just went back to my straight blade steel and I just inconsistently highlighted some of the edges. So I did it inconsistently so that it seems a bit rough, but it brings a little bit of shine back and it just gives the impression of some aging. And now just thinking about the tough guy, he's out in the wild, adventuring, fighting, all of that sort of stuff. I'm thinking maybe some of these metallic parts might have started to go a little bit rusty. And so that's what I'm doing here. So I've just picked out a couple of spots where I want there to be some rust, and I'm just going to gradually build up that rust effect. So I'm starting here with the Typhus Corrosion, which is a Citadel texture paint. It's just like a really, really dark brown, but it's got a bit of grit to it. Now, the thing that I found over time having a go at painting rust is that to get a more convincing rust look, you don't want to have the whole surface having the same level of rust. You want to pick a couple of spots where the rust will have started, and then it will have spread from that spot across the surface. So you want a most concentrated spot, and then gradually it becomes less concentrated away from there as the rust is starting to spread. And so with the Typhus Corrosion, I put it down in a couple of spots where I want it to be most concentrated, and then I just blended it away from there till it becomes back to just the unrusted steel. I repeated that a couple of times to build up the concentration, then I moved on to my Vallejo Rust Wash. It's just got a orangish sort of colour to it, just to start that discoloration. And now I've moved on to my Riser Rust, which is a Citadel dry brushing paint. And so here I just put it down, just a little blob of it where I want the rust to look its most concentrated. Then I just wet the bristles a bit and then just feather it out, spread it out a little bit. And then I put another blob where I want it to be the most concentrated, and then I just don't spread it quite as far. And then just repeat that a couple of times. And then just as a final little touch, I just put another careful little blob right where I want the rust to look like it started. And then like here, I don't spread it at all. And that way you can give the impression that the rust has started in some certain spots and started to spread, but it hasn't yet covered the whole surface. And you can see I just picked another couple of little spots along the chain to do that as well. And so going with this rust effect was just a choice that I made while painting, just thinking about the way that I wanted this guy to look, thinking about what sort of a character he is. And I think it helped tells this story that this guy spends most of his time out in the wild. Alright, so just as I do the last couple of finishing touches to the tough guy's base, we're going to call him done. So thank you very, very much for checking out another one of my videos, and as I always say, I really hope there's something in this video that you can take away and use in your own painting, or at the very least you just enjoyed watching me paint him. If you did enjoy the video, please do give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so to keep up to date with future videos as they keep coming out. This is probably going to do it for Etherfields for the moment. I'm going to move on to painting Bloodborne, which is a recent game that's arrived, and the minis in there look amazing, so I'm really, really excited to get onto painting them. So please stick around for that if you'd like to see how I paint that as well. Also, please do stop by the Twitter and Instagram accounts for this channel where you can see what I'm painting and what videos are going to be coming up next. And also, if there's anything that you take from my videos, whether it's a paint scheme, a technique, or you just straight up copy how I've painted something, please post it to Twitter or Instagram and tag me in it, because I love seeing how you guys use my videos to help with your painting. But that's going to do it for today, so until next time, this is Matt from the Plastic Canvas signing out. Happy painting, everyone. Cheers.